Grammy Award-winning conductor Lucas Richman has served as music director for the Bangor Symphony Orchestra since 2010 and was music director for the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra from 2003 to 2015. Over the course of nearly 4 decades on the podium, he has garnered an international reputation for his graceful musical leadership in a diverse field of media. In concert halls, orchestral pits and recording studios around the world, Richman earns rave reviews for his artful collaborations with artists in both the classical and commercial music arenas. Please join William Ford from AtlantaMusicCritic.com in conversation with Maestro Lucas Richman.
Hi, William.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good. Where are you?
I'm in Bangor, Maine.
Okay.
My home.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk.
Absolutely.
One of the things that we miss in a lot of interviews is trying to understand what kind of factors made it possible for you to be the outstanding musician that you are.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen to everybody. So, where were you born?
I was born and raised in Los Angeles, in the San Fernando Valley.
When did you first have an inkling that music would be something you wanted to do?
I have known, I've been very fortunate to know from a very young age that I was, that music it was entrancing for me. And my father was an actor and a writer, and he always followed us around with a Super 8 camera. And one of my favorite home movies was when I was 3, dancing on a low table in his den to the music of Fiddler on the Roof, and just with incredible exuberance, feeling the music. You won't catch me dancing in public these days, but I really responded to the music, and I started taking piano lessons when I was 5.5, and very quickly I was actually reading the biographies of composers, and I found it fascinating. I was an early reader, and the thing is that when I would get to the end of these books, the composer was always had always passed away. So, being that very young age, I thought, in order to be a composer, you have to be dead. But then I read the autobiography of Aaron Copland, who at the time was very much alive. And I got to the end of the book and he was still alive. And I ran to my father and I said, Daddy, I want to write a letter to Aaron Copland. And my father said, Lucas, I don't know if I can get his address. And Daddy, I want to write a letter to Aaron Copland. So I did, and he found the address of Aaron Copland, who was at the time living in Peekskill, New York. And my parents said, listen, Lucas, he's a very busy man. He's the icon of American music. Don't expect an answer. And 6 weeks later, I got a postcard from Aaron Copland saying, Dear Lucas, I received your letter and thought it was very fine. Good luck in your composing. Your friend, Aaron.
How nice.
The fact that Aaron Copland took the time to write to a 6-year-old boy in the San Fernando Valley across the country was truly extraordinary, and something that has stayed with me my whole life. I did have a chance to meet him 10 years later when I was a student at Tanglewood, when I was 16. I feel like I grew up at a real golden age, meeting scores of incredible artists, composers, conductors, musicians, instrumentalists, writers, both on the East Coast and the West Coast. Many people who were involved with the whole film industry, TV industry, and I kind of ended up dabbling in both the commercial world and the concert world and musical theater and dance and all kinds of things from my upbringing in Los Angeles.
Were your parents musically inclined?
My parents loved music, not trained musicians. My mom always sang to us, and I think that I realized later on in my life that it was because of the fact that my mom sang lullabies to me. The lullaby is the first introduction that a child has to associating love and music. It's a connection that happens between a parent and a child with a deeper vibration, and it forges a connection. And too often, parents don't know that they should sing to their kids, and they'll leave the child in the room and they'll put on a CD and leave. But in fact, it would be those moments when you're humming to the child and you're forging a connection, and that honestly, I think, was very important for me. Always having music in my head, in my body. My father also loved classical music, so he would, when he wasn't acting, he would be painting, and he would paint. He'd have the stereo blasting Stravinsky and Rimsky-Korsakov and Tchaikovsky while he was painting these big canvases.
When you went to school, I assume you went to a public school?
I did. Well, I started off in private school up until through the second grade, and then third grade went to public school.
And did you play piano throughout that whole time?
I played piano. I've been playing piano my whole life. So I actually stopped taking lessons when I was 13 because I had started taking violin lessons.
Got it.
And violin became my focus for the good part of my later teens into my 20s, where I was still studying, and I was a violin major at UCLA. And that then led me, the violin led me to playing in orchestras and transitioning into being a conductor. And one of the things I'm grateful about having learned the violin is that the bow technique ended up influencing the fluidity of my conducting technique.
When you were playing violin, for example, what was the reaction to from your peers to your playing and your musicality?
It's funny you should mention, because my dear friends from a long time ago, lifelong friends, if they watch this, they will say, well, Lucas was always a better composer and conductor than he was a violinist.
Really?
I played violin and viola, and I was serviceable. I was I think I started too late. I was 11 when I started digging into it, and there were always other things that I was more interested in doing, even though I ended up using the violin as a means by which to get to other things, and by learning. I learned the entire orchestral canon through playing violin and playing in the orchestra, and playing not only first violin, but playing second violin and playing viola, so you could hear the orchestra in the middle of the ensemble. I was fine as a violinist, and I went through and I did my senior recital and all those kinds of things. But I knew that that wasn't going to be my main focus and what I would do for the rest of my life. There were other people. It was actually a great lesson, because I knew that there were other people, some of my closest friends, who were much better than I would ever be, and they could do that, and I didn't need to be the best at that. I had needed to find what it was that I was really good at.
Would you say that your main interaction was with other young people who played music? Were they the bulk of your friends?
Oh, absolutely. I was a music geek all through high school, junior high school, and at music camp, the New York State Music Camp, Tanglewood, every possible configuration. In high school, the meeting place was the choir room, and our director, Ed Krasinski, was really inspirational in the number of things that he conducted, the choruses, I got 2 years of theory in high school, and learned so much from him. And then at that point, there were times when he said, I can't come back for rehearsal. We were doing the musical, Lucas, could you take over? And so suddenly I was 14 and I was conducting the orchestra for the high school, and really great opportunities to do these sorts of things. I was very fortunate to be able to have that kind of experience early on. And as I say, I was never really into sports, but my friends really came out of the music situations. And frankly, when you're making music with people, these are my lifelong friends. I've got friends from 45 years ago.
Nice.
That we played in youth orchestra together. And it's a shared memory, and you're connecting on a whole other level. It's not just verbal, or we went to go to Disneyland together, but in fact, weekly or daily, you're communicating through this incredible medium called music.
You went to UCLA in music?
I was a music major, got my bachelor's in music as a violin major from UCLA, and I studied with Alex Traeger, who was a co-concertmaster of the LA Philharmonic. A very fine teacher. He was always a little bit disappointed with my level of practicing. Lucas, you don't vibrate. Because at the time, I was 2 years ahead in school. So I actually started UCLA when I was 16. And before classes had even started, I auditioned to be the accompanist for the UCLA Musical Theater Workshop led by John Hall. And I got this job. So suddenly I was very, very involved in playing for all the classes and the productions and all this. And I was on staff for the UCLA music department at 16. That for me became my main focus. That was my love. I enjoyed it so much. And I just couldn't find it within myself to practice 3 hours a day scales and that kind of stuff. I didn't have the discipline at the time to do that kind of thing.
Where did you go after UCLA?
So I graduated from UCLA in 1984. And at that point, I had been in the violin section in the orchestra, the Young Musicians Foundation debut orchestra, which was an orchestra originally founded by Sylvia Koonin in Los Angeles as a training orchestra for conductors. Everyone from Michael Tilson Thomas and Myung-Non Chung, Neil Stillberg, Calvin Simmons, Andre Previn early on, a whole host of conductors got their first start working with the YMF orchestra. I was in the orchestra, and then I became the conductor for the orchestra from 1984 to 1987. And with that, I had the opportunity to audition for and work with Daniel Lewis, who was running the conducting program at USC, the University of Southern California. He accepted me into the master's program, and I studied with him for 2 years. Incredible opportunity to work with him. He taught me musicality through clear technique. I mean, he was a tremendous teacher and with incredible integrity. The USC orchestra under his leadership always sounded like the most immaculate professional orchestra. Stunning. I learned so much from him. Very, very grateful for that. So that was a master's program in conducting from USC.
And then where to?
Then I, through various connections, John Green was the president of the board of the Young Musicians Foundation. And John Green had been the head of MGM Music for years. He won an Oscar for the best adapted film score for Oliver, the movie Oliver, and he's known as the composer of the song Body and Soul. He became a mentor to me, and he invited me to conduct in 1987 a special tribute to Leonard Bernstein. This was the Southern California Harvard Radcliffe Alumni Association dinner honoring Leonard Bernstein. And Bernstein came out to Los Angeles. We did a whole evening of Bernstein's music, and I conducted, among other things, the Candide Overture and Glitter and Be Gay and music from West Side Story and this and that in front of Bernstein. And 2 weeks later, I got a call from Harry Kraut, who was Bernstein's manager at the time. And Harry said, Lucas, you should apply to the Schleswig-Holstein Music Festival. And I said, what's that? And he said, Lucas, you should apply to the Schleswig-Holstein Music Festival. I said, okay. So I received a round trip ticket to Germany. And in the summer of 1988, I was off to Salzau, Germany, where I was one of 16 conductors and then pared down to one of four conducting fellows chosen to go on tour conducting in concert with Leonard Bernstein, doing concerts around Germany. And then we did performances in Moscow and in Royal Albert Hall at the Proms Festival. While I was on the tour, I found out that an audition I had taken with the Pacific Symphony in Orange County had gone very well, and I had a job to come back to when the festival was over in Germany, to become the assistant conductor for the Pacific Symphony. And I was there for 3 years, in 1987 through 1991, making the transition when Carl St. Clair became their music director in the 90-91 season. We never know where our path is going to take us. And at the time when I was a young conductor, I thought, okay, I've been assistant conductor for a large regional orchestra for 3 years. Now maybe it's time for me to be a music director. So I applied to all kinds of things I couldn't get an audition. I could not get seen. I have a stack of rejection letters this high. And I was, as I mentioned, 2 years younger. So all my colleagues, I saw them turn 30 and they didn't have an orchestra and they would get married and then and start teaching. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I turn 30 and get married and don't have an orchestra, I'm just going to die. Well, when I was 30, I didn't have an orchestra. I was teaching middle school and high school, and I got married. And I thought, okay, this is just, it's over. I don't know I'm not going to have any other chance because the industry wants the young people, and I'm already over the hill at 30. Don Tulin was a conductor. He had been music director for the Spokane Symphony years ago. He was directing the conducting program for, at the time, what was called the American Symphony Orchestra League, which is now the League of American Orchestras. And they had a program to help promote young conductors. And Don invited me to be a conducting participant in the conductor preview with the Omaha Symphony. So, and at the time, Victor Yampolsky was music director of the Omaha Symphony. And I had known Victor from my time as a student, 3 years at Tanglewood. And Victor had been music director for the Boston University Tanglewood Institute Orchestra. I went to Omaha, did very well, and then out of that got the opportunity to become cover conductor for the tour of the St. Louis Symphony with Hans Bank. And right after that, audition for the Pittsburgh Symphony. They had heard about me through all of these, through the conductor preview. Went to Pittsburgh, auditioned, and this is in January of 1998. At the time, I had already been conducting in the films in Los Angeles. We did a big production of Candide at the Amundsen. I was music director of that, doing 61 performances of that. I had just been offered to conduct a major production of Swan Lake, which was the incredible production directed by Matthew Bourne, Adventures in Motion Pictures, that had played on Broadway and, or actually it had played in London and then it was going to go to Broadway. And I had been offered to conduct Swan Lake on Broadway. I auditioned for Pittsburgh, and the vice president for artistic planning took me aside and said, Lucas, the committee likes you, but they don't know why you'd want this job. Because I was making a lot of money, conducting films and having other opportunities. But I knew that this was extraordinary. So I ended up meeting with the committee, and had a good interview. And then I called my wife, and at the time we had just found out that she was pregnant with our son Max. And I said, "So how'd you like to move to Pittsburgh?" And I heard this and 20 seconds of silence on the other line. And then she said, "Okay." And we decided to go to Pittsburgh. And I'll be quite honest that the salary was not anything that you'd want to necessarily go on, a 1-year contract with no guarantees. It was $34,000 a year with no moving help or anything like that, and starting a new family with no family support at all. But it was the best decision I could have made, because the association then with the Pittsburgh Symphony, and Morris Jansons was the music director at the time, and my colleagues, Edward Cumming, and then later on Daniel Meyer as our staff conductors. I just learned so much from having the opportunity to work with the great orchestra and great soloists and conductors that came through at Pittsburgh for those 6 years that I was assistant and then resident conductor.
Any particular stories about Jansons that you want to share?
Morris was quite an inspiration, and he really took advantage of having his staff conductors. I really appreciated that. I had been in other situations where you're there as the cover conductor and you're supposed to get the ears in the house, but then so much ego going on that the conductor doesn't really want to hear what is actually making its way out into the hall. Morris was not like that at all. He absolutely trusted and wanted to hear what we had to say, and invariably when we'd say, we can't hear this instrument, or the articulation there, it's not coming through, right away in the next rehearsal, he would own those remarks and convey that. And it was like, okay, we're being heard and we're being valued. And it came to be a quite an amazing thing, especially on tour, to have the opportunity to conduct the Pittsburgh Symphony. Of course, Morris was doing concerts, but we would do a sound check in every venue. So I remember specifically being at the Musikverein in Vienna and getting up there and having the chance to conduct Also sprach Zarathustra and Mahler. I think we were doing Mahler 1. Mahler right where Mahler stood. I mean, just mind blowing to have that opportunity. And Morris was giving in that way. He knew to take advantage and to nurture those who had the talents around them, to nurture the talents of those around him. And I will never forget the last performance that we did on our final tour with Morris in Royal Albert Hall, 2 evenings. The first one culminating in Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony, and then the second night was Mahler 1. And I had never heard the orchestra play. I mean, it was absolutely brilliant to the smallest hemi-demi semiquaver. I mean, just whatever. It was extraordinary, the sound. And there were several members of the orchestra who were retiring after the tour. So it was very heartfelt, because this was the last time that this orchestra would sound like this with this music director in this hall. And one of those once in a lifetime kind of things. A lot of things happen on tour. Extraordinary opportunity. We were doing the Mozart Requiem in Carnegie Hall, and I had the opportunity to sit next to Elie Wiesel, who was a guest of Morris, and I brought him backstage after the Requiem. It was things that would never have happened if I stayed in LA. as much as I love film scores, and I still continue to do work in the studios. Having that depth of world experience was something that could only have happened with that move to Pittsburgh.
Then you also became music director in Knoxville, and now you're in Bangor.
Yes. I was music director became music director for the Knoxville Symphony in the 2004-2005 season. I was there for 12 years, and the last 5 years of that tenure, I became music director for the Bangor Symphony. So I was commuting back and forth between Knoxville and Bangor. While I was in Knoxville, we did some great work, and I was able to get through full cycles of different composers' works and commission new works. So besides doing all the Strauss tone poems and all the Beethoven symphonies and all the Tchaikovsky symphonies, even number 3, which is rarely done, we did commission several new pieces. I'm very, very proud of that. And several of my own works were premiered with the Knoxville Symphony as well. The result of which, for instance, my piano concerto, which was written for Jeffrey Beagle, was premiered in October 2013. And the wonderful patron, Tom Shaw, who had sponsored that evening's concert, that weekend's concerts, was so enamored of the concerto that he offered to coordinate and pay for the recording. And we ended up recording my piano concerto with the Pittsburgh Symphony a couple of years later, which was a life dream.
You've been in Bangor for how long?
Now in my 12th season. I think it's 12th. Yes, 12th season with the Bangor Symphony. It's flown by. I love the orchestra. I love the city. We enjoy this place so much. It's quiet, and yet we have access to whatever we need, and it's easy to get anywhere we need to go very quickly. It's funny because we've been moving from larger to smaller through our whole life, and while Bangor is not a big city, we love the fact that we know our community, and there's a absolute genuine love of the arts. The Bangor Symphony is one of the, if not the longest continuous orchestra in the Northeast, in our 127th season.
But you're back in the concert hall.
We are.
Okay.
And we're doing concerts with audiences, live audiences, and also offering a online presentation to subscribers and ticket buyers. Jumping
back to your Hollywood work, what are some of the productions you've worked on?
Absolutely. So one of the first major film scores I conducted was the movie Seven, music by Howard Shore with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman. I conducted the score for As Good as It Gets, which was up for an Academy Award by Hans Zimmer. And one of my favorite scores by James Newton Howard was The Village, the music for the film by M. Night Shyamalan. Hilary Hahn was the soloist, and James recognized that they needed a conductor who could work with a soloist of her caliber and also coordinate, knowing the technology of syncing the music to the film. So that was an extraordinary collaboration and one of my favorite film scores, and it was also up for an Oscar.
What's the major challenge for a conductor doing music for a movie? Or not major one, what challenges is probably a better way to put it?
Well, there's always a time constraint. If I'm conducting, then it means that the composer is able to be in the booth listening. I'm there to serve and to facilitate with expediency the recording. After meeting with the composer, and hearing the mock-up, I know better what it is that they're trying to convey. So if I hear things that are counterintuitive to what is on page and what they want for the scene, I'm able to make suggestions, but I also have to temper that because I'm not completely in control of the moment. I can't say, okay, this is my gig, and now the flutes and the oboes and I can't do that because thousands of dollars are ticking away every minute. So it's learning to be very judicious about and concise with direction, and everybody, when you're recording, they're all at the top of their game. I mean, it's the musicians that come for these recording sessions are extraordinary. They're reading it down. It sounds like it's the final take. They're so good. So we all have to be on that level right away. I did a recording once. Was called in very last minute to do a recording of Breakdown, the movie called Breakdown, with a score by Basil Polidorus. And unfortunately, he was very ill that last day of recording, and I got a call very last minute. Lucas, can you be at the studio at 9 o'clock? We've got a 10 o'clock session, and the music will be there. Okay, sure. So we get there, and I get there at 9, and the music's not there. 10 o'clock session begins. The first cue up is a 6.5 minute chase scene with multimeters, and it's very, very complicated. So I turned through the pages real quick, and then, okay, let's go. we read through the whole piece, and then they said in the booth, okay, Lucas, come in and let's take a listen. I walk into the booth, and the sound engineer said, dude, how'd you do that? So you learn a certain amount of efficiency. And I will say that has come to me by being an assistant conductor, because assistant conductors invariably need to prepare full programs with very, very little rehearsal. My first concert I ever did with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, I had 3 different programs to prepare with a 2.5-hour rehearsal. And one of the pieces on the program was the Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, and I was narrating. So can you imagine the complication? And this is my debut with the LA Philharmonic, and I'm trying to remember which end is up and when do I talk and all that. So you learn efficiency because you have to get through all the music. And I think that has held well for me working in the studios, and listen, it happens all the time. We just in January for our masterworks with the Bangor Symphony, we had a full program to prepare. Normally we rehearse on Friday evenings and Saturday all day, and then we've got another rehearsal, touch-up rehearsal on Sunday. We had a blizzard on Saturday. So smack in the middle of our rehearsal sequence, we canceled the rehearsals. So it completely, it forces one to rejigger the entire thought process of how we're going to get through all of this music and make sure that everyone feels comfortable, that they're not hanging on a thread like we've never seen this music before. And with a certain amount of efficiency, we're able to do it because everybody's behaving in a professional manner.
Do you ever feel that because of the pressures when you're doing a movie production, that you're sacrificing something musically?
It's not for me to determine at that point, because the composer has the final say. And when the composer says, we're moving on, it is the composer's call. There's a certain amount of music that they need to cover hourly. Otherwise, they're going to run out of time, and they're going to go to overtime, and it's more expensive. So it's really not my call at that point. I might say, you know what, I think we can do a better take, and that happens, and if there's time, then we'll do another take, and hopefully we get better the very last time. One of the first that I mentioned, the movie Seven, and this was really a kind of extraordinary collaboration, because Howard Shore was still writing the score while we were recording. New Line was still editing the footage, and so they didn't have a lock on how long each sequence was. So Howard had written these sequences that were vaguely what they needed instead of being absolute. And what ended up happening was that, and I said, do you want me to try to match anything on these screen? He said, no, just go. So it was actually an extraordinary thing, because I felt like I was free conducting to a ballet on the screen. And no take was the same in terms of the timing. I mean, there were a few places where we were in sync with the click track, but most of the score was actually pretty amorphous, and it was fascinating, because it just normally doesn't happen that way.
Do you know if they'll tweak the recording after it's done regarding tempos in order to make it fit the scene a little bit more precisely?
There are times that will happen, certainly. With technology now, you can you speed things up slightly without changing the pitch. And if they needed to take 2 frames out or 10 frames out of a scene, or add something back in, absolutely. And also, because the standard is that the composers are pretty much always required to create a mock-up of the full score before you get to the recording stage. So the director is hearing a synthesized recording of the whole score. And sometimes the director kind of falls in love with the mock-up. And there are times where the mock-up is used interchangeably with what has been recorded by the musicians. So once you're using a mock-up, you can manipulate that in any kind of fashion you like.
Talk about your own music.
Sure.
Is that broad enough for you?
Broad subject. I've been writing for a very long time. I am very fortunate to have been able to have just about every piece performed. I write for performances. I've never felt comfortable being the kind of composer that I need to get this out of my body and then put it in a drawer. I've been fortunate that I've always had deadlines and performances, and this goes for everything from concert works to film music. I've written 2 film scores myself, and music for TV. Chamber music, lots of chamber music, and musical theater. So I've written it for just about every medium. Of late, my music has been more and more involved with social issues. So, for instance, during the bicentennial year of Leonard Bernstein's, the centennial celebration of Bernstein's birth, I got special permission from the Bernstein family to utilize as inspiration the quote of Bernstein from his speech that he made to the United Jewish Fund after JFK was assassinated, in which he spoke about what do we do? What can we possibly do as artists in the face of tragedy? And he said, this will be our reply to violence, to make music more intensely, more beautifully, more devotedly than ever before. So using that quote as an inspiration, I wrote a symphony called This Will Be Our Reply. It's in 3 movements: intensity, beauty, and devotion, with the chorus singing in the last portion. The piece was the chorus sings ends up with an anthem of Tikkun Olam, which is heal the world, and the piece has been performed now across the country. It was premiered by Dan Alcott with the Oak Ridge Symphony in Tennessee, and he actually is going to be doing performance with the Bryan Symphony in Tennessee on April 24th, coming up. The work that is coming up, my piece called The Warming Sea, on March 19th. This was commissioned by the Maine Science Festival as an exploration of the impact climate change is having on the Gulf of Maine. The Gulf of Maine is the fastest warming body of water in the world. It's remarkable. And we were supposed to perform this in March of 2020. And this was one of the first things that we ended up having to cancel with the pandemic, the onslaught of the pandemic. So we are now going to have the premiere. It is for children's chorus, women's chorus, and orchestra. The piece is about 20 minutes long, and it was also written with the idea that to celebrate the bicentennial of Maine, which was in 2020. So in the main body of the piece, there are 200 measures, each one referring to a different year, and in each of those measures is a pitch that is related to the temperature fluctuation of that. So you hear the temperature fluctuate through the 200 bars. We met with students throughout the state of Maine, and I told them about the process. This is in addition to my meeting with scientists and finding out all kinds of things about climate change. And I know more about plankton than I ever thought I would know. In speaking to the students, I'd tell them about the piece, and then I'd say, what would you like the takeaway from this piece to be? And invariably, this climate change hits home to them, because a lot of them on these coastal cities, their parents are fishermen, and they're seeing what's going on. And they said, hope. We want to feel hopeful. So the anthem that the children sing at the end is called Hope Begins with Truth. The kids sing to the audience. Have you told them? Have you told your children the truth? Things are changing. Things will not remain the same as they were. And basically telling the audience, we've got to do something. This is our future. As the performance could not take place in March, we were able to do a remote recording of the anthem with singers from across the country and members of the Bangor Symphony. So available on YouTube is a sample, the last 4 minutes. If you look up Hope Begins with Truth, Bangor Symphony, you can see that video and hear how the piece ends up. And that's how we will conclude the piece on March 19th.
How would you describe your music? Is it latter-day, romantic, contemporary? I know boxes are really difficult, but
one of the things that I've learned about myself is that I function best when I am true to myself. I will get back to your question, but I have to mention this. There was a point probably 20 years ago when I realized I don't need to continue trying to be my mentors. I can be me. And I have to own that, and I have to be comfortable with it, because no one else is me. And I look around, and there are other people that, in fact, wanted to be doing the things that I was doing. So with that, I have found my own voice through the years. I love melody. I love the idea of melodic fragments. I use melodic fragments as the thread that ties a piece together. For instance, with the Warming Sea, the melody that the kids sing, have you told them, da ba, 1 2 ba ba, those 4 notes, those notes are I assigned HOPE. Have you told them? And that little melodic fragment runs through the entire piece, to the point where with the women's chorus sing as sirens earlier in the piece, the mythological story of the sirens who would sing and woo the sailors to their demise on the rocks. But in this case, the sirens are climate change deniers. And if we listen to their song, we will die. Their song is the absolute inverse of what the children sing at the end. So looking at the blank page is one of the most daunting things for any creative artist. I will always create some sort of parameters that generate material for me to work with. And it generally will come from some kind of melodic fragment. The techniques I use are techniques. And if I write something that is a 12-tone this or that, or an angular something that sounds contemporary and dissonant. It is a technique unto itself. I am not really big on bleep bloop music, as some people call, and I don't mean to offend, but I've heard and I've conducted a lot of that music, and I don't necessarily get it. It doesn't register for me. I don't get the full gamut of emotions with random music that is just gestures. Music as it in and of itself is an abstract that it's intangible for a lot of people to describe and to follow. So when you have an audience that is not an musically informed audience, it behooves us as creative artists, I think, if you want them to come back and to listen to your music, it behooves us to throw them a bone and say, come on, follow. This is where we're going. This is where we're going with this. And help the listener, because it is a complete abstract. I mean, how it's like putting somebody in the dark room, and then if you didn't give any kind of guiding light, how would you find your way to the other side of the room? You couldn't. So you have to have some sort of beam of light that says, okay, we're following this path. Okay, I can find my way. So long answer, I do love melody, and I love expression, and more than anything, I love storytelling. And I endeavor to tell stories through my music. And the stories that I tell, I try to tell as honestly as possible. The pacing of that is very crucial. I do in a score of music what a novelist would do in a book.
Mm-hmm. Excellent explanation.
Thank you.
I have kept you for an hour.
Has it been an hour already?
Yes. I really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation. And I hope it was easy from your point of view.
Oh, it was terrific, William. Thank you. I really appreciate
Good.
the chance to speak with you.
All right. Take care, man.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.